Namaste to Nivedita and everyone else. Nivedita is the Susan iPhone. Om Dhyau Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithivi Shantihi Apaha Shantihi Ashadaya Shantihi Vanashpataya Shantihi Vishvadeva Shantihi Brahman Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shantir Soma Shanti Edi Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Peace is in the heavens. Peace is in the interregions. Peace is in the earth, and peace is in the waters. Peace is in the plants, animals, birds, fish, creepers, and herbs. Peace is in the celestials and those in higher realms. Peace is in humanity, men, women, and children. And peace is in peace. Brahman is this ineffable, all-pervading peace. May that peace be realized by us, permeating us from the very core of our being. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome, everyone. We are going to continue with our study of verse 15 of the 58 verses of the Encomium on the excellence of self-effort, and then launch into verse 16. And there is a kind of theme in this, actually in both verses. And I would say that, as kind of an umbrella way of putting it, it's that our relationship with objects is wrong. And therefore, we're creating karma, we're performing actions incorrectly, we're having attachments and desires for things that we think are outside of us. We all know this. But we can state it this way, that our relationship with nature and objects is amiss. And in the studies that I engaged in this week, I came across, I'm kind of spilling the beans before we get there, but I came across this commentary that was just talking about how, the darshanas, many of the darshanas of India, they just come right out and say that Brahman or Paramashiva, or by whatever name they give to the absolute reality, pure conscious awareness, all pervasive, all those good words, that by whatever name they give it, that's all there is, because it's one without a second. And then the rest of it is how to qualify that statement so that those coming along after the Vedic seers can make that right conclusion. Because if we try and make that conclusion too soon, then, we're taking objects to be real in and of themselves, or we're taking the ego to be the Atman, and things like that. So it's very nuanced, and we have to take it step by step. And we'll be hearing more about it, especially as we get to the teachings on purity. Let me share my screen here. So it's the one that we're working on right now is, as I began to sport in the various lokas, the three chains of transmigration cast their shackles towards me. We're going to spend just a little more time on this. We've actually already gone through the three chains, gone through most of the three chains of transmigration. And you'll remember that they are desire-based action, attachment, and aversion. So we worked through our way on the actions portion of this, selfish actions that create more karma. And we looked at the different karma charts that we often use. And then we were just launching into the part on attachment and desire. And we're not going to dwell on that too much, but I wanted to bring up a particular chart for how this attachment develops. And we're going to take a look at a Buddhist teaching. And I know some of you have seen this chart before, maybe even recently with Babaji. But it breaks it down, how we forge these ties of attachment and desire. Often we refer to the five kleshas, which I think are kileshas in Buddhism. But in yoga and Samkhya, we talk about the five kleshas, which are ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. And there's lots of teachings on all of those. Yet it's very handy to walk over to the 12 nidanas of Buddhism and take a look in this very hands-on way how this first covering of ignorance, which veils our true nature, then comes into form, and what happens after it goes into form. So let's just take a look at it. We have to look to our previous existence in this system, and it makes total sense because we would not have taken a body unless we had work to do, basically, and karmas to fulfill or to neutralize, and desires to fulfill. So here we have it. So ignorance, which in Buddhism, they say that it's failure to affirm the suffering-ridden nature of existence and renounce it. And let's just look at that in terms of when in the kleshas, when we talk about ignorance, it's tamas, that veiling of our divine nature. It's that veiling that creates a division in what's indivisible, right? Right there, that's our clue that it's unreal. So from there, we have this separate identity, and we're looking out on the projection of the universe, and we see all these enticing things. So we forget that there's suffering there, and we don't renounce it. Then the next thing is we carry these samskaras, these mental impressions from our previous lifetimes. Nobody is a blank sheet upon taking birth. And they're both positive and negative. We shouldn't, just immediately go, oh, samskaras. In the beginning of SRV, when Babaji was teaching us about this fact of samskaras in the chitta that we carry with us from lifetime to lifetime, he would say sometimes, we're trying to create samskaras here for spiritual practice, samskaras of knowing that God is existence itself, samskaras of knowing that the only purpose of embodiment is realization of our divine nature. He says, what happens when you go to a canyon and, you call out, hello, and it comes back. Hello, right? So there's a wall out there, and if you call out to it, something comes back. But he was saying that in our Western culture, this belief in a true soul, this belief that this knowing that God is the ultimate reality, we're losing the canyon wall for it. We've already lost the canyon wall overall for spiritual practice. I mean, how many people in conventional religious circles just think that religion is a matter of going to your temple or going to your church, right? And believing in some things. And if so long as you believe in it, you're going to be okay. Anyway, of course, that's one certain segment, but it seems to be predominant. Let's put it that way. So this is what, Babaji's been working to do, and the Swamis who've been coming over, starting with Swami Vivekananda, to help us forge and create and build this canyon wall so that when we say, who am I? We get a response back. When we say, what is spiritual practice? We get a response back. So those are positive samskaras we want to build. And then later on, we can dispense with all samskaras. So at the very earthly, worldly, transmigrationally level, these samskaras are subtle deposits from physical, verbal, and psychological actions that form in the mind. And the mind, of course, we have to always know that there's more, that the brain is like there's a word for it. It's sort of like a radio, and the mind is the source of the vibrations that go into that radio. So then the next part is vijnana, which is different in Buddhism than it is for us in Vedanta. It means relative consciousness, right? So not absolute consciousness, but relative consciousness, the kind of consciousness that's operating in time, space, and causation. So we have this as a result of these beginningless cycles of transmigration. And thereby awareness gets crystallized by previous life experiences and enters into wombs. In other words, we have this desire, this root desire for embodiment and experiences in embodiment. Another way of putting that is that we haven't yet discovered within ourselves, the ability to exist just as consciousness. We think that consciousness needs a container. So, and after that, nama rupa, name and form. A fresh body is formulated based upon past impulses and impressions. And then there's Shadayatana, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. The 6 bases. So then experience is springing from exposure to the realms of the senses, which develop more karma. I mean, it starts right at birth and having all those senses and learning how to use them and having, natural automatic desire for food, for mom, etc. Sparsha, contact and relations, intermingling with the world, its peoples, and its objects contributes to karmic conditioning. As we grow up in our family and engage in our neighborhoods and our communities, sensation, continual and repeated stimulation of body and senses adds further conditioning. So you can see, just like Sri Ramakrishna said, that because of the habit of experiences in lifetimes, we keep coming back. Then Trishna, craving and desire, develops. And from there, desire for further contact of senses with objects arises in order to gain satisfaction. We're performing that pallid imitation of everyone else, which, kind of at the basis of it is seeing other people seek outside, to go seeking enjoyment and working so that they can acquire the things of enjoyment and so forth. The other thing that we learn here in this Trishna, this craving, this desire, is that if we have this if we desire it, we reach out for it, we get that further contact with the objects of the senses, then it either increases our desire for them, or we get bored for it and we seek other kinds of experiences. So this is why, remember that chart of Babaji's that has the 2 wheels on it, and it's the 9 ways of dealing with desire. One of them is, one of the wrong ways of trying to deal with desires is just seeking to fulfill them, to enjoy them. Whereas the only way you can fulfill them through enjoyment is through the Dharma, because that puts it in the right perspective. So from there we get attachment, selfish clinging to sense life, which enmeshes the mind deeper in embodied existence. And then, due to decay of the old body, a desire for a new body arises. So that's how we get to attachment, looking at it through the 12 nidanas. And we quoted that verse from the Bhagavad Gita: brooding on the objects of the senses, attachment arises, and from attachment comes desire, from desire comes anger, from anger comes confusion, comes delusion, from delusion comes confusion of memory, and due to the confusion of memory, one perishes. In other words, they get stuck on the wheel of transmigration. So the only thing I want to add to this are those always good to remember statements of Holy Mother, where she says, and actually I was supposed to say this as a prelude to the 12 nidanas, that attachment is the root of all desires. It is the cause of repeated births and deaths, and it is the main obstacle on the path of liberation. So we can, take a look in our lives, and what is it that we are attached to? And here we think again of Holy Mother, because some, in our Judeo-Christian society, there is this tendency to browbeat ourselves and feel guilty about things we shouldn't feel guilty, or even confused about things we shouldn't be confused about. And Holy Mother put it very clearly. There are 2 kinds of desires: one that stimulates enjoyment, and the other that quickens dispassion. So when we do this self-analysis, this discriminatory analysis about our habits and our actions, our enjoyments, we can take a look and see, do these stimulate us for more enjoyment, or are they helping us go towards God? And if we have a strong spiritual practice and we are intent on always putting our Ishtam before our mind's eye, and offering our experiences to our Ishtam, to God, then whatever little desires we may have around food, around, just the small things, they will get attenuated over time. So from there now, we want to move into the rest of that. So when the three chains of transmigration came into view as our sage was sporting in the different realms of existence, or the three worlds, as we were saying last time, his teacher saw this, his illumined preceptor saw this, and immediately transmitted to him the teaching of the three kinds of purity. So, and that's purity of place and location, of place and object, purity of action, and purity of mind. Before we launch into it, let's take a look at what purity means, because again, in the West, we have ideas that purity has to do with moral and immoral. And of course, we can't ever dismiss that entirely, but the meaning of purity goes much deeper. So let me share this next chart. And we'll start with Babaji's quote here at the top. In Indian philosophy, the term pure and the impure do not necessarily correspond to morality and immorality. Here, the word impure does not mean dirty or corrupt, but rather what is distant from reality, which is ever pure. Therefore, mind and its ego-tainted knowledge, energy in constant flux and change, and dense matter, these are considered impure, being that they are conditioned and limited. Beyond them, and transcendent of time and space, is pristine awareness. So that's a good thing to know, that purity has to do with how much our mind can focus on true reality. How close can it get? So here are the tattvas, or the aspects of reality that are inherently pure by nature. So Brahman, absolute reality, or original awareness, is up at the top. Mahashakti, or Kundalini, is the dynamic power of Brahman. That is inherently pure by nature. Kutastha, this is Brahman as the substratum of all manifestation. Sakshi, this is Brahman appearing as the witness of all phenomena. The Atman, Brahman appearing via association with the five sheaths. And Ishvara, Antaryami, the primeval or firstborn soul seated in the heart. Wow, that's beautiful. So all of these are inherently pure by nature. And when we think about our spiritual practice, every aspect of it is about, taking off the veil so we can see precisely these things within, even here in this very body, as they say. So let's take a look next at, now let me bring this down a little further, at what is mixed pure and impure. The word for that is Shuddha Ashuddha, mixed pure and impure tattvas. Okay, so here we're talking about tattvas, which are the different cosmic principles from causal, subtle to gross. Some of these are the tattvas that we're familiar with in Samkhya, and others are drawn from other sources. So Maya is one of those. Maya is the formless substance of the worlds in this rendering. And then kala is the concept of time and phases of time. These here represent the some of the 12 higher tattvas that we find in Tantra. Vidya, knowledge in differentiation. Cosmic laws and natural order is niyati. Raga, the power of attraction and involvement. Notice here, we've been using the word attraction at a much grosser level as it relates to the gross tattvas, or the lower, the gross, the impure tattvas. But here we're talking about it as a power, the power of attraction. Think of the power of God to attract us to God, the power of the guru principle to attract us to the teacher, and so forth. Purusha, the individual sentient soul. So those are the mixed, pure, and impure. Now, further away from the source is the antakarana, the fourfold mind, the tanmatras, which are the 5 subtle elements, the indriyas, the 10 senses connected to the mind. And if anyone here doesn't know what the 10 senses are, those are, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, but then also handling, moving, speaking, procreation, and excretion. Then notice that all of these have a lot to do. I mean, we can say more about the fourfold mind here. It gets a little more nuanced. But in general, the way this is being presented is that all these things are going outward towards the physical senses, to the externalized objects, which are the objects of the senses, the 5 great elements. So, but what we also see here is kama, desire, which again is oriented towards these objects, and deha, the physical body and its constituents. Mahabhutas, that's the 5 elements in a gross state. So this really puts a very philosophical mode on this idea of purity and how that fits in our spiritual practice. So, another way, oh no, we'll save that for later. Think about when we're focusing, especially in the beginning of spiritual life, we have our chosen ideal, or we have our concept of God. And how often in trying to bring the mind to a focus there, to concentration there, it is drawn out by the senses. It is drawn out by the mind thinking about what has to be done next, or what was done in the past, and so forth. So in so many different ways, these mixed pure and impure, as well as these impure tattvas, come at us. And so we have to get the mind to transcend them. That's perhaps the best way to put it. And to leave off dalliance with emotions that get in the way, passions that get in the way, attachments that get in the way. All right, so next, we're going to take a look at the primary chart for the 4 purities with this in mind. And I think I had, right, and before we do this, exactly, let me bring up another aspect of purification. Let's give it that word rather than pure and impure. So there's another aspect of whether something is pure, and that has to do with an admixture. In a sense, I was just alluding to that, where I talked about when I was referencing when we, in the beginning of spiritual life, and we sit for meditation and we say we have our mantra, and we're focused on our mantra and we're focused on our chosen ideal connected to the mantra, but our mind keeps going out through the senses to the objects and also thoughts of the object. And this means that the mind is mixed. It's mixed up with a bunch of things. So we don't want to relegate, from one of the commentaries I was reading, if one doesn't want to relegate the kingdom of one's soul to matter and bodies, the three kinds of purity are a method to purify the mind, to return to the natural mode of spirituality again. For, as Babaji continues in this particular commentary, if the mind becomes impure, the world follows suit, for the mind is the projector of the worlds of name and form. So we want to engage in this removal of admixtures. And these three purities are the way to do that, a way to do that. Excuse me, I'm trying to share my screen and not succeeding. Here we go. So let's start here at the bottom. And we're going to focus on all of it. Okay. Before I was thinking we would focus more on these parts that are the practice, but we're going to take it all together. So the first part is purity of location and atmosphere. So in the beginning of spiritual life, and even continuing on into more intermediate and advanced stages, it's extremely helpful to keep places pure. So where we're going to do our practice, we set up a place, we set up an altar, we set up a shrine, and we put flowers, and we burn incense, and we burn candles, we chant our mantra, we study the scriptures, we practice meditation, we engage in this, and we engage in puja. So we have these articles, whether it's just our candle and our incense, or whether we have a little tray of different items that we use for offering things in ritual worship. All of these are consecrated, and we don't use them for anything else. And so they get imbued with this purity and with this sanctity. So this activity in our consecrated area further makes it further holy. And as Swamiji would point out when he was, I think it was in Bhakti Yoga, maybe it was in Raja Yoga, trying to encourage his students to do precisely this, so that if the mind becomes disturbed out in the world, we can come back in and sit in the shrine, in our meditation area, and become calm again easily, because the vibrations of peace and purity are there. So other things, and this is represented by, it's called Vaidhi Bhakti. It's external devotion. And it also increases this external devotion, starts to nurture the sattva in our mind. So here we have, as it says here, performance of puja, chanting of the names of the Lord. This can be musically or in sing-song or even monotone. During this beginning of our spiritual practice, we will take mantra diksha usually. So all of this generates power, and out of this comes different kinds of spiritual experiences. And as this intensifies, then we begin to shift towards this kriya siddhi, not away from Dravya Shuddhi. We carry that with us every step of the way, but it begins to leave the shrine room so that we've developed enough power that we can take it out into the world with us. So Vaidhi, so we come to this Kriya Shuddhi, and we can begin to have purity of act and deed. The divine being that we've been worshiping in the image and on the altar, or as the divine presence, formless at the altar, it now travels with us. We begin to feel it inside of us in a very deep way, so that it comes with us into all of our activities. And we develop the ability to offer prayer and charities. When Babaji describes this in Footfalls, he's talking about this performance of offering, this offering of prayer and good works for the benefit of others, done in a selfless way, which is increasingly about seeing the divine reality in them. We are making that offering to our Ishtam, who is both here and manifesting before us. Maybe we don't completely see it that way, but the power to engage our actions that way has developed. And we have the capacity to observe austerities and engage in the sacrifice of selfless service, as I was saying. And so if this truly intensifies and gets to, a peak, then it develops into raga bhakti. Now, this is a very, very high state, according to Sri Ramakrishna. So at this point, let's kind of back up a little bit and take a look at Sri Ramakrishna's quotes. He says, repeating the name of God a fixed number of times, fasting, making pilgrimages, worship with offerings, doing sacrifices, by continuing on in this path for a time, one gradually attains Raga Bhakti. And so and in contrast, the Vaidhi Bhakti, which we were doing through external worship, is like moving a fan to create a breeze, right? We maybe didn't have a great deal of desire, but great deal of devotion for God, but we had the desire to be devoted to God. Just like Holy Mother said, there are desires that increase our longing for enjoyment, but there are desires that increase our longing for God. So engaging in external worship is one of the beautiful ways of doing that. So Vaidhi Bhakti is like moving a fan to create a breeze, but the fan is set aside when the south wind blows by itself. This is like Raga Bhakti, wherein one feels love and attachment to God naturally. Very beautiful. And then when this intensifies, all along the way, we are developing more and more purity of the mind and intellect. And Sri Ramakrishna says here, but one cannot realize God without prema bhakti. When one has such love, one does not get attracted to the maya of spouse, children, and relatives and friends. One retains compassion for them and does what is good for them, cares about them, but it's compassion and not attachment. In fact, so elsewhere he says, love just for your family and relatives is maya, whereas love for all is daya, compassion. So as we're approaching this pinnacle of prema bhakti, and the mind is becoming closer and closer to source, right? Because that's what purity means, being closest to the source. Then our devotion to God is increasing manyfold. If we thought it was amazing when it first awakened in our hearts during Vaidhi Bhakti, this is a kind of devotion that, as Sri Ramakrishna says, makes us forget our body. You know, think about Sri Ramakrishna and how during his 12-year-long sadhana, how many days he would go without even thinking of food, without even thinking of sleep. In fact, I recall reading somewhere in the Great Master that which is the biography on him, that he said that one time he went like 6 months without sleep. So that may sound impossible, but when you're spending most of your time in samadhi, such a thing is possible. But in any case, he said his eyes did not close. So in that level, we're increasing our devotion to God. The mind is so pure, we can study the non-dual scriptures and understand them. And we have the capacity for practicing formless meditation. So think about this. As this develops, you know, what started out as just a practice in a corner of our home, possibly a whole room if we're fortunate enough. What began there and was sort of left there as we went out to do the rest of our work gradually intensifies until it's not something that we get a nice feeling from in seeing it at our altar, but we're feeling it within and recognizing the connection between the inner self and its manifestation, you know, God within and God manifesting in form before us. And then we take that with us into our actions. And as this all matures, then even our mind becomes purified as well. As Sri Ramakrishna says, it's not that we're doing these things and saying, I must be selfless, or I must do this good to others and try and be selfless. And no, don't let that ego in. It becomes natural. It's no more are you doing this with a fan to create a breeze. The breeze is blowing from within, and you take it everywhere you go. So back to our verse 15, you can see that by following a practice like this, it scares away the chains of transmigration. So on that note, and with 15 minutes to go in class, then maybe we'll do an introduction, or maybe we'll get all the way through it. I don't know. Let's take a look at this chart, which also gives our next verse. So here's our next verse. And I would say that 15 and 16 are like really related. At the lowest of the 3 stages of mental evolution, my mind experienced doubt and foreboding. But the 4 kinds of worship and the 4 ways of perceiving God prevailed and transported me higher. So I created an entire chart for this. Let me make it small enough that you can get a whole view of it. So we see here, I don't know if it'll come in clearly for you, but I'll expand it in a minute. The 3 stages of mental evolution. And how many How many people knew what that was before I showed the chart? Anybody? Okay, brooding mind, thinking mind, and illumined mind, right? And we've actually taken this up as previously, but only as a corollary to one of the verses that we studied before. And then here's the 4 ways of perceiving God as the symbol, the universal symbol, archa, as the antaryami, the inner ruler, immortal, seated in the heart, as Ishvara, or the Ishta, the personal God, also called Saguna Brahman, and as Brahman, the non-dual reality. And then here are the 4 kinds of worship. And I'm going to show you Babaji's chart also after we just get an introduction to this one, because these are very related, and the 4 kinds of worship show up almost completely in it. So the 4 kinds of worship are external worship, mantra, ishta-nishta, which means one-pointed devotion, and Advaita dhyan, meditation on non-dual reality. So remember at the beginning of class, I started off by saying that the difficulty that we have in embodiment is that we are raised to have the wrong relationship with objects. And those 4 purities that we just went through, and these 2 teachings of the 4 kinds of worship and the 4 ways of perceiving God, these go a long way to righting our relationship with objects. So let me see what we want to do next here. You know what? I think we're just going to start taking up. Let me expand this a little bit. We're going to take up some of these quotes. After we talk about why it's laid out the way it is. So it was in brooding mind that our sage had problems. And what he said was, at the lowest of the 3 stages of mental evolution, my mind experienced doubt and foreboding. Now that's directly related to a wrong relationship with objects, and also the false superposition of ignorance, tamas, which is completely related to brooding mind, covering the nature of our eternal existence, our eternal reality. So how do we get that foreboding? It's the same reason that in verse 15, he was saying that he was sporting in various worlds, and he saw those 3 chains of transmigration coming at him. Why? Because he was not she was not acting selflessly and creating karma, and was having attachment and desire for objects and not for divine life. So what does Sri Ramakrishna say about this? He says, in this, and it only happens in this state of brooding mind, which is tamas and rajas going back and forth. Remember, we talked about, I'm throwing too much at you maybe, but I want us to kind of keep the teachings coming forward, the ones that we've studied. So when we studied the antaryayas, also called the vikshepas, things like doubt and complacency and confusion of philosophy, all those different ones that we looked at, there's 9. We have those when the mind is vacillating between tamas and rajas, back and forth. And That's the vikshipta mind that is talked about in yoga. That mind that is sometimes concentrated and sometimes falling out. So that's if we're going back and forth between tamas and rajas and just a little light of sattva every now and again. So, but when we're just in tamas and maybe leaning a little bit towards leaning into rajas, this is what we would call brooding mind. And Sri Ramakrishna says, those in bondage are sunk in worldliness and forgetful of God. Not even by mistake do they think of God. And then we have this rather painful, but very explicit and descriptive quote from Sri Krishna out of the Bhagavad Gita. Filled with insatiable desires, full of hypocrisy, pride, and arrogance, holding evil ideas through delusion. Such beings, he's here speaking about the demonic beings, they work with impure resolve, beset with immense cares ending only with death, regarding gratification of lust as the highest, and feeling sure that that is all, bound by 100 ties of hope, given over to lust and anger, they strive to secure by unjust means hoards of wealth for sensual enjoyment. So that's, to me, that's a very painful quote. And we see it in operation naturally. And when we look at the verse that we're looking at, he says, my mind experienced doubt and foreboding, right? Because he was touching in on those, perhaps touching in on some of those things at a lower level of his development in some lifetime. So, and then also, I put that one with regards to the teaching of the 4 ways of perceiving God in relation to Archa, the universal symbol. And in Babaji's commentary, which is really wonderful in the Footfalls, his commentary on the 4 ways of perceiving God. In fact, I should give you that information. It's in Footfalls, it's page 703. He talks about how this word Archa, which means the universal symbol, came about to be used to explain how objects do not exist except for the presence of God. Without the presence of ultimate reality, objects do not exist. And so in a certain sort of way, not a certain sort of way, these are manifestations, but the manifestation itself is not the thing. The essence is the thing. We've heard this many times, but this word Archa embodies that teaching. So Sri Ramakrishna says that one consciousness has become the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles. This is how we begin to have a right relationship with objects, just like in performing external worship. And then getting back to that idea that Brahman is the foundation for the manifestation of all objects. We have this teaching out of Tibetan Buddhism. Let me make it a little more readable. All phenomena bear the great seal of combined emptiness and luminosity. Further, all things are literally stamped with the luminosity of pure mind. So this is the way it's put in Tibetan Buddhism. So every object we see, has emptiness because the object cannot fulfill, it comes and goes and so forth. But it's imperceivable without the presence of consciousness. So the luminosity of pure mind is sealed within it. And so again, here's how we right the boat of our relationship with objects. So here's a quote from Babaji that I came across. Because we, in Vedanta, as we're learning to discriminate between the self and the not self, discriminate between the manifestation and the essence and so forth, we might just say offhandedly, oh, it's all Maya, and be averse to it or want to be averse to it. So Babaji says, if you are looking at Maya and condemning it, you are on the wrong track. You should be deifying it so the deities come out of it and bless you. So that's very beautiful. That takes us to back to the cosmic principles, the 24 cosmic principles, which are, every single one of them has a deity associated with it. So the deity is a manifestation of Brahman essence at a very transcendent level. And the tattvas themselves, the principles themselves, are the manifestation. So when we say that Archa is the universal symbol, we should be on our way, looking to be on our way to understand that everything is a symbol of reality. So that's as far as we're going to get on this chart for tonight. And we'll take it up again in 3 weeks. And I'll close now with a prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamaya Mrichur Ma Amritam Gamaya Abhira Bhira Mayedi Rudra Yate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from the illusion of death to realization of eternal existence, pure and indivisible. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.